The world has changed quite a bit when it comes to the development of applications. And a lot of the things that people do today have been very focused on very high-value types of applications, whether they're data mining applications or e-commerce applications or even transactional business types of applications. These individual applications are being built at such a high rate of speed that the projects are very compressed in time and are very costly in some cases, depending on what types of things are trying to be created and the automation of those things on the back end and how the automation needs to be put together and how it needs to be tied to the rest of the processing that goes on in a business. So fundamentally, the question that we have to ask ourselves is the one that you see on the screen. How can you accelerate your application development? Because the more cost that you can drive out of that application development process, the more time that you can drive out of that application development process, the better off your application developers will be, the better quality your applications will have from the development standpoint, and you'll have a better way of managing every application from the automation standpoint going forward. Because when we think about that application process and we think about the development that goes on, each one of those application teams is taking on a deliverable or multiple deliverables and going through a development cycle. And that development cycle normally is I create what I need for my application, and then I create the automation that goes around it, whether it's a script-based automation or something like that. And I think about how things are hooked together and how what the process flow is. And the problem is that it's kind of done in a silo. It's kind of done with blinders on because of the time frames that are applied to the application development. And a lot of these little circles are spent going through the same process over and over and over again. Creating a script, creating the application, creating the deliverable, and then writing the automation, testing it, and continuously going through that process of making sure that that individual piece of the application is specifically built the way it needs to be built and is continuously evolving as the application needs to evolve. The problem with this model is that there's a whole lot of coding that goes on here. A lot of time is spent not only writing the actual piece of code or the actual function of the application that one developer is creating, but also the automation on the back end, where I would give that script to be run every day, every hour, based on a transaction, whatever it happens to be, and have to test it, have to maintain it, have to make changes to it, and continuously manipulate these individual entities. What we want to do is take a workload automation solution like Control-M from BMC and stop that process, that iterative cycling for every application developer. And we want to give them a tool that will allow them to create an object-oriented model for creating their automation of their application so that they can actually see how it's operating, how it's connected to not only the other pieces of the application that other people have written, but also where those things intersect with the rest of the business. And making sure that they have the ability to see that information, manipulate that information in a very short space of time, not have to write so much code to interact with specific back-end systems like the Informaticas of the world, the databases of the world, any web service or Java types of or individual functions. All of these things now are things that have already been incorporated into the Control-M workload automation solution as objects that can be utilized to do the automation. So each one of these boxes that you see on your screen are those types of things, whether they're a Java process or an FTP transfer or working with an ERP solution. All of these types of things are now objects where they don't have to spend the time not only trying to figure out what they need to write for the application, but how to interact with that system in a more batch-oriented mode. And taking all of that thought process, this visualized object-oriented thought process, and surrounded with excellent tools to help them plan that automation, to help the operations folks monitor that automation and understand what's going on and if there are any problems in the process, to give good tools historically so that I can actually look at what happened on a given day in the past and understand what exactly went wrong, when it went wrong, and do those root cause analysis things for things that happened at any specific time of the year, whether it's yesterday, a quarter end, a year end, a month end, or whatever you need it to be. And then also give the operations folks and, if necessary, the application development folks a forecasting capability to actually say, okay, I run this application, it runs every day, but I'm going to absorb a new company, and this application is going to take in more transactional records than it normally would because of that activity. What actually happens if this job in my flow runs twice its average duration, 3 times its average duration, whatever it happens to be? So Control-M is now not just a workload automation solution that runs jobs. It is now continuously evolving and adding tools and adding functionality to make it also an application management tool, so that I can actually farm this out to the application owner and let them build their automation and then have the operations folks, the people who are responsible for the 24/7 monitoring and all of the regular management of those individual workflows, the ability to help them through the process of using the tool properly and applying those workflows to the schedule so that they run the way they're supposed to. And when they do run, and when they are in the system, we want to think about this thought process of criticality. We know that every time a job runs or a function runs in a workflow, that there is the potential that it will create a problem, that it will fail, that something outside the normal scope happens inside of that execution, and something happens. The question really becomes, how do I assign that criticality? And typically, application developers don't know that when they're building all of these types of things by hand without using an object-oriented type of workflow management system like Control-M Workload Automation is. And we want to have the ability to have this described to them in the best and shortest form possible. And Control-M has the ability to do that. And it can actually do that based on criticality and time. This job, this set of work must be finished by a given specific time of the day. And that time of the day could be a physical or a calculated time. It doesn't matter. The truth is that I have the ability to go out and dynamically track all of those things by a given deadline. And that deadline can then be exposed to the end user. It can be exposed to the operations folks. It will identify for you those jobs that are absolutely critical in that application workflow to make sure that everybody understands the criticality of those jobs that are absolutely necessary to process the application to its deadline versus those things that aren't. And have the ability to provide that information to folks at the job level, but also at a dashboard type of level. And whether we're talking about it operationally, where I actually, as the operator, get a chance to see how a group of jobs are performing based on its deadline and getting good information back about those types of mundane questions that people ask us, like how much time do we have left in this application's run? Are we going to be late? And if so, how late are we going to be? I can see all of those things in the tool without having to look at everything function by function or object by object. I can come to this dashboard and say, for my billing application, it's expected to be completed by 5:47. Its deadline is 6:30 in the morning. I have 42 minutes left before I have a material breach in my service level. That's great for operations. But the problem is that operations isn't the only set of people who need to know this information. And the nice thing is that Control-M takes this information and gives the ability to see that at the end user level as well, so that they can go to a website or go to their tablet or go to their phone and actually see that same operational information even down to the object level where I actually can see the actual status of the objects, what Control-M has been monitoring, what information has come back from those executions, what log information, or looking at the steps that Control-M took to get that execution instantiated, and see all of those things without having to know everything about Control-M. This is the thought process behind the speeding of delivery. Taking objects, giving you better interfaces, giving you better ways of interacting with your third-party applications, and centralizing all of that in one tool that will manage the workflow from the beginning to the end, and manage it in the most effective way to make sure that it gets done in a specific time frame. When we think about this from the standpoint of why we use Control-M for this, it's because our technologies are changing. Our technologies are all over the enterprise. And the problem is there are too many individual tools, single tools in those applications that allow you to do small parts of the automation, but don't give you the ability to broaden the scope of the automation to cover everything that would be in an application workflow. For Control-M, we've spent lots of R&D time building specific integrations to things like web services in Java and messaging buses, to do file transfers without scripts, to work with databases like SQL Server and Oracle and Sybase and DB2 and even open source databases like Postgres. Working with backup systems like Tivoli and Symantec Net Backup so that when I finish that application workflow that I can actually trigger off a backup of that data so that I have a snapshot at the time of what happened after the data that was produced after that workflow completed. I can work with ERP tools like Informatica, Cognos, DataStage, SAP Business Objects. I can work in the Hadoop space, or what they now call big data, where I can actually work with that system directly and actually run that type of work as well, along with the typical ERP processes like SAP, PeopleSoft, Oracle E-Business Suite, and so forth. And then, of course, if I need to work with other types of technologies in the cloud, where I know I have to run this application workflow, but I don't have the resources available to me right now, if I have the ability to work with or talk to Amazon EC2 and bring up some public cloud resources to process that work and then shut them down, or do the same thing with VMware or BMC's BladeLogic tools, you have the ability not only to manage these application workflows efficiently, but you have the ability to expand and contract the IT resources that could be brought to bear to better process that application workflow in situations where resources are tight. All of these things are object-oriented. All of these things don't require scripts or commands or any special type of coding language to learn. And the other thing is that if you don't have or don't need, or you need an actual function that we don't have a prepackaged integration for, Control-M has what we call the application integrator technology, which allows you to build your own. So if you have a web service that you would call to that third-party application to do something, or a command line interface, you can actually program or create an actual control module, an actual integration for Control-M to work with that third-party tool that we don't have a prepackaged integration for. This is one of those strengths that Control-M presents to the marketplace that nobody else has. And this is the kind of object orientation that every application developer really wants, but doesn't have the time to build or doesn't have the tools to build. Control-M is that tool.